The morning sun spilled softly over the crowded streets of Manila, painting the chaos with a golden haze. Jeepneys blared their horns, tricycles zigzagged through traffic, and vendors called out prices in sing-song voices. Amid the noise, a familiar sound began to rise, not the sound of traffic, but of music. It came from a narrow alley beside a small church, a voice so deep and soulful it seemed to quiet the world around it. People paused mid-step, drawn by that melody echoing through cracked walls and tin roofs. There, standing beside a faded poster of Elvis Presley taped to the wall, was Marco Dela Cruz, a young man in his late 20s, with a cheap guitar and a dream too big for his pocket. Marco's fingers moved gently across the strings, his voice filling the air with warmth and sorrow. He sang "Can't Help Falling in Love," and though he was just one among thousands of street performers in the city, something about his tone made him different. His voice carried a story of struggle, of hope, of love unbroken by hardship. Behind him, his mother, Aling Teresa, sat at a small wooden stall, selling handmade rosaries and small candles to passers-by. Her hands were thin, her hair streaked with silver, but her eyes glowed with pride every time her son sang. She would often whisper prayers under her breath while threading beads. "Lord, let someone hear him today," she would murmur. "Just one person who can change his life." Marco knew she prayed like that, and it made him sing even harder. Every note, every lyric, was a message to her, "Don't worry, Ma. I'll make it one day." But the truth was, life hadn't been kind to them. His father, a carpenter, had died years ago in a construction accident. Since then, Marco had taken every odd job he could, selling bottled water, shining shoes, carrying loads in the wet market, all while singing on the streets for spare coins. Music was his refuge, his escape from hunger and exhaustion. But more than that, it was his way of keeping his father's memory alive. His father used to play Elvis songs on an old cassette player every Sunday, while the family danced barefoot in their tiny home. Marco had learned to imitate the king's voice as a child, not because he wanted to sound famous, but because it reminded him of laughter of simpler days. Now, years later, that same voice carried through the same streets that had once watched him grow up poor and barefoot. A group of schoolchildren gathered around him, their laughter echoing as they clapped along to his beat. One of them, a little boy, shouted, "Kuya Marco. You sound like Elvis again." Marco smiled, winking at the boy mid-song. "Thank you, little man. Elvis lives, huh?" He always said that with pride, not because he thought he was special, but because Elvis was hope to him. A man from humble beginnings who made the world stop and listen. When he finished the song, a small crowd had formed. Some threw coins into his open guitar case. Others took videos on their phones, whispering to one another, "Who is he?" An older woman approached him with tears in her eyes. "Anak," she said softly, "you sing like you're praying." Marco smiled, bowed respectfully, and said, "Maybe I am, Tita." He packed up his guitar after a few more songs and walked back to his mother's stall. The sky was turning gray, clouds threatened rain. His mother handed him a small lunch wrapped in banana leaves. "Eat, Marco," she said. "You've been singing all morning." He took it with a grateful smile and sat beside her. They shared the simple meal, rice and a small piece of dried fish. For a moment, it felt like enough. Then, as thunder rumbled in the distance, his mother spoke quietly. "You know, Anak, when you sing, people stop. They listen. One day, someone important will hear you." Marco chuckled, shaking his head. "Ma, important. People don't come to alleys like ours." But she looked at him with firm eyes. "Then sing loud enough that your voice reaches them, even from here." Her words lingered. "Sing loud enough that your voice reaches them." He carried those words with him as he set up again, this time under the shelter of an old awning. The rain began to fall, first softly, then in sheets. Water pooled on the uneven pavement, but Marco kept singing. His voice seemed to grow stronger against the storm, the deep, velvety tone cutting through the rain like light through fog. He sang, if I can dream one of Elvis's most heartfelt songs, a plea for hope and unity. There must be lights burning brighter somewhere. People huddled under umbrellas, watching him from afar. Some filmed, others simply stood in silence. It wasn't just a performance, it felt like a prayer for every person who had ever struggled, every soul who dared to dream while the world turned cold. When the last note faded, applause broke out, soft at first, then growing louder. Marco looked up, surprised to see not just locals, but a few tourists clapping too. One of them, a tall man with graying hair, smiled at him from the corner, clearly moved. But Marco didn't think much of it. He simply nodded, thanked everyone, and went back to his small corner beside his mother. As the rain slowed, the alley glistened, puddles reflecting the city lights. Marco sat quietly, humming to himself, unaware that the man who had just heard him was still standing there, recording the moment. That stranger's small act, one video, one upload, would soon change Marco's life forever. But for now, in that humble alley, it was just a boy and his voice, singing for love, for hope, and for his mother. And even though the world didn't yet know his name, anyone who passed through that street left carrying a piece of his soul, a reminder that greatness doesn't always start on a stage. Sometimes, it begins in the rain-soaked alleys of Manila, sung by someone who believes in dreams no one else can see. The rain had not stopped for hours. Manila's narrow streets shimmered under flickering streetlights, the puddles reflecting streaks of neon from small stores and jeepneys that roared by, their engines growling against the storm. Vendors packed away their stalls early, but Marco stayed. He had learned long ago that rain was both a curse and a blessing. When it poured, fewer people stopped to buy, but those who did often lingered longer, listening to his songs. Under the tattered awning of a sari-sari store, Marco strummed his worn-out guitar, his fingers trembling slightly from the cold. His voice rose above the sound of the rain, steady, rich, hauntingly full. Wise men say, only fools rush in. He sang softly, his tone carrying that familiar warmth that could make even the hardest hearts pause. Raindrops tapped rhythmically on the tin roof above him, joining the melody. His mother sat a few meters away, wrapped in a shawl, counting the day's earnings in a small wooden box. It was a quiet, ordinary night, or so it seemed. Across the street, under a large black umbrella, stood a man who didn't belong there. His clothes were foreign, a leather jacket, jeans too clean for Manila's muddy roads, and shoes that had clearly never known a puddle. His name was John Miller, a retired music producer from Tennessee visiting the Philippines for the first time. He had wandered off the main road, looking for shelter from the storm, when he heard that voice. At first, he thought someone was playing a recording, a lost Elvis track, perhaps. But as he got closer, the sound became rawer, more alive. And then he saw him, a young Filipino, drenched in rain, strumming an old guitar with missing frets, eyes closed as if singing to the heavens. John's heart tightened. It had been years since he'd heard anyone sing like that, not since the golden days of rock and soul. He stood still, listening as Marco's voice deepened, his accent barely noticeable, his tone pure and aching. But I can't help falling in love with you. The last line hung in the air, tender and trembling. Even the rain seemed to pause for a moment. A small crowd of locals, huddled under umbrellas, clapped softly. Marco bowed, smiling with genuine humility, his eyes kind even as fatigue showed on his face. John approached slowly, careful not to startle him. "That was beautiful," he said in a thick southern accent. Marco looked up, blinking in surprise. "Oh, thank you, sir," he said politely. "Just trying to make the night a little less quiet." "You sound just like Elvis," John said with a chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. "No, wait, not just like him. You sing with that same soul. That same fire." Marco laughed shyly, scratching the back of his neck. "I grew up listening to him. My father used to play his songs every Sunday. I guess it just stayed with me." John smiled, moved by the simplicity of his words. "Well, son, I spent 40 years in the music business. I've seen people try to imitate Elvis, but you feel the music. That's rare." Marco looked at him curiously, unsure how to respond. Compliments like that didn't come often, especially from strangers. I just sing what I feel, sir. Life's heavy sometimes. But when I sing, it feels lighter. For a moment, the two men stood there, the rain softening to a drizzle, the hum of traffic fading behind them. John could see something in Marco's eyes, not just talent, but humility, the kind that makes art pure. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Would you mind if I recorded you?" he asked. "I want to show my friends back home. They won't believe me otherwise." Marco hesitated, then smiled modestly. "Sure, sir. But, don't expect much. I'm just a street singer." "That's exactly what Elvis was before the world heard him," John said, adjusting his phone. Marco laughed softly, strumming a few gentle chords. "All right then, let's give your friends a song." He began to sing, "If I Can Dream," his voice low at first, trembling slightly before growing stronger with each line. John held the phone steady, his eyes wide. "There must be peace and understanding sometime. Strong winds of promise that will blow away the doubt and fear." The song echoed through the alleyway, spilling out into the street. A few passers-by stopped, mesmerized. A tricycle driver turned off his engine just to listen. Even the shopkeeper leaned out, tears welling up in her eyes. John felt his throat tighten. Every word Marco sang seemed to come from deep within, a lifetime of pain, hope, and endurance condensed into a few minutes of melody. When the final line came, Marco closed his eyes and whispered it as if it were a prayer. "Oh, while I can think, while I can talk, while I can stand, while I can walk. While I can dream. Please let my dream come true. Right now." Silence. Then, applause, gentle, hesitant at first, then louder, stronger. Someone shouted, "Bravo, Kuya." Another whistled. But Marco just smiled humbly, bowing slightly. John turned off his phone recording and exhaled deeply. "That," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "was the most honest performance I've seen in decades." Marco chuckled. "Honest is all I know, sir." John nodded, slipping a folded bill into Marco's guitar case, enough for several meals, though he didn't want to embarrass the young man by saying so. "Keep singing," he said, his tone firm. "You don't belong in this alley. The world needs to hear you." Marco looked down, a faint smile on his lips. "Maybe someday," he said softly. John hesitated. "What's your name, son?" "Marco," he replied. "Marco Dela Cruz." "Well, Marco Dela Cruz," John said, "you've just made an old man believe in music again." With that, he shook Marco's hand, a firm, respectful shake, and disappeared into the rainy night. Marco watched him go, puzzled but warmed by the encounter. People often stopped to listen, sometimes even gave him tips, but something about that man felt different. His sincerity, his eyes, the way he listened, not with curiosity, but understanding. He turned back to his mother, who had been watching the exchange from her stall. She smiled knowingly. "Who was that, Anik?" "Just a tourist, Ma," Marco said with a grin. "He said I sing like Elvis." She laughed softly. "Then maybe he's right." They both chuckled, packing up as the last of the rain faded into mist. What Marco didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that just hours later, that tourist would upload the video of his performance online. A simple caption: "Found this young man singing Elvis in the streets of Manila. He doesn't just sing the song, he feels it. The world deserves to hear him." And as Marco fell asleep that night in their small apartment, his guitar resting beside him, somewhere across the ocean, the first few thousand people pressed share. He had no idea his voice, the same one that had echoed through Manila's narrow alleys, was about to reach the world. The next morning began like any other. Manila woke up to the familiar hum of life: jeepneys rumbling, vendors shouting, radios playing morning news. The scent of freshly cooked rice and fried fish drifted through the air. In their small apartment above the church alley, Marco Dela Cruz sat on a wooden stool, restringing his old guitar. His mother, Aling Teresa, was preparing breakfast rice, eggs, and a small cup of instant coffee they shared between them. She smiled as she handed him the cup. "You sang late into the night again," she said gently. "Your voice will get tired." Marco grinned. "You know me, Ma. Once I start, I can't stop. Music's the only thing that listens back." She laughed softly, but her eyes were full of quiet concern. The cough she tried to hide betrayed her weakness. Her health had been fragile for months, her legs aching constantly. Marco noticed but never said a word. Instead, he sang louder, as if his songs could heal her. What neither of them knew was that somewhere across the world, a video was beginning to spread like wildfire. It started with a few hundred views, then a few thousand. The video John Miller had uploaded titled "The Filipino Elvis, a Voice That Feels Like Home" began circulating among Elvis fan groups. Someone shared it on Facebook. Then Reddit. Then YouTube reaction channels picked it up. By noon, the view count was climbing so fast that even John couldn't believe it. He opened his laptop in his hotel room, scrolling through thousands of comments. "Who is this guy? He's better than half the artists on the radio. I'm crying, he sings with so much soul. Find this man. He deserves the world. This gave me chills. That's what real music sounds like." The video wasn't just going viral, it was touching hearts. People didn't just hear Marco's voice, they felt it. His raw passion, the street background, the sound of rain in the recording, everything made it real. John leaned back, whispering to himself, "Kid, you have no idea what's coming." Meanwhile, back in Manila, Marco had no clue. He spent the morning helping his mother restock rosaries and light candles in front of the church. By afternoon, as the heat rose, he set up again in his usual spot, same cracked pavement, same faded Elvis poster fluttering behind him. He sang "Suspicious Minds," his voice echoing through the alley. People came and went, some filming as usual. Around dusk, his friend Rico, a tricycle driver, came rushing toward him, waving his phone wildly. Bro, you're on the internet." Marco laughed, mid-song. "Rico, I've been on the internet for years." "You mean Facebook posts of me singing for 2 likes? No, man, listen." Rico shoved the phone in his face. There, on the screen, was the thumbnail of John's video. Marco's image soaked in rain, eyes closed in song had millions of views. The title read, "From the Streets of Manila, the Voice That Will Move You to Tears." Marco blinked. "Wait. What?" Rico scrolled. "Look. CNN, ABS, CBN, even BBC shared it. Bro, you're famous." People around them started murmuring. "That's him? The one from the video?" Cameras flashed. Someone ran to get an autograph. Marco froze, confused, overwhelmed. He stammered, "But how? Who posted this?" "That foreigner. The one who listened to you last night." Rico said excitedly. "He said your name, Marco Della Cruz. The world's looking for you, pair." Marco sat down slowly, trying to absorb it all. His mother, hearing the commotion, stepped out from the stall. "What's happening, Anak?" He showed her the video on Rico's phone. She squinted at the screen, her trembling hands covering her mouth as she saw him singing under the rain, her son, her boy, watched by millions. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Oh, my God. Marco. People can hear you." He looked at her, still stunned. "Ma. They really can." That night, their small apartment filled with the glow of their old television and the soft buzz of notifications from Rico's phone. Reporters were messaging, producers were reaching out, and talent agencies were trying to contact him. Marco didn't know what to say. "I never even dreamed of this, Ma. I just wanted to earn enough to fix your legs, maybe buy us a better roof." His mother took his hand gently. "Maybe this is how God answers prayers, Anak. Not all at once, but when it's time." He smiled faintly, still unsure. "But what if it's just for a week? People forget fast online." She squeezed his hand. Then sing while they're listening. And when they stop, sing anyway. Her words hit him deep, a reminder of why he started. Not for fame. Not for money. But for love, for faith, for something larger than himself. Days passed. The video climbed past 10 million views. Radio stations played the audio clip. Television networks began calling it the miracle voice of Manila. Journalists found his alley, flooding it with cameras and lights. Marco wasn't used to the attention. He still bowed to every stranger, still thanked everyone who dropped coins in his guitar case. He turned down flashy offers that felt wrong, choosing instead to keep singing for free in the church alley on Sundays. But one night, an email arrived that would change everything. It was from Global Star Talent Los Angeles. They had seen his video and wanted to invite him for an audition on an international stage, America's Got Talent. Marco read the message twice, then a third time. Ma. He whispered, his voice trembling, they want me to sing in America. His mother looked up from her sewing, eyes wide with disbelief. In America? Anik, that's the biggest stage in the world. He nodded slowly, tears forming. But what if I'm not good enough? What if they laugh at me? I'm just a boy from the streets. She walked to him, placing her frail hands on his cheeks. You are not just anything. You are my son. You carry your father's dream. If the world finally wants to hear it, go, Marco. Go and make them listen. That night, Marco sat on the rooftop, looking out at the glittering lights of Manila. The city hummed below him, alive and restless, but he felt a strange calm. The world had found him a boy who sang for spare coins, now being called a global sensation. But fame didn't fill his heart. What filled it was gratitude for the stranger who listened, for the mother who believed, and for the music that had never left his side. He whispered softly into the night, almost like a prayer. If I can dream of a better land, where all my brothers walk hand in hand. The words echoed faintly through the air, a promise to himself and to every dreamer still waiting to be heard. And far away, across the ocean, people kept sharing his video, moved not by glamour, but by a simple truth: greatness doesn't need a stage. Sometimes, it just needs one heart brave enough to sing. The airplane roared as it ascended above the clouds, its engines humming like the deep rhythm of a song Marco once sang in the rain. For the first time in his life, Marco de la Cruz was leaving the Philippines, a boy from the alleys of Manila, now flying thousands of miles away to America's Got Talent, the very stage where dreams from the first all over the world collided. He gazed out the window, mesmerized by the sea of clouds stretching endlessly below. His hands trembled, not from fear of flying, but from the weight of it all: the disbelief, the gratitude, and the quiet fear that whispered, "What if I fail?" Beside him, his mother held his hand gently. The producers had flown her in too, after hearing their story. Her eyes glistened as she looked at her son, now wearing a simple white shirt and the same old guitar case he used back home. "You remember what I told you, Anik?" she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Sing loud enough that they can hear me, even from here." She laughed through tears. "Exactly. And don't forget where your voice comes from, your heart." He nodded. That heart, shaped by love and struggle, was about to face its biggest test. When they arrived in Los Angeles, everything felt unreal. Towering buildings, wide streets, and lights that never seemed to dim, the AGT Arena was enormous, far beyond anything Marco had ever imagined. Backstage buzzed with excitement, dancers stretching, magicians rehearsing tricks, singers warming up their voices. Marco stood quietly in a corner, clutching his guitar, feeling small among giants. A producer approached him kindly. "You ready, Marco? You'll be performing right after the dance group from Japan." He nodded, his stomach twisting in knots. "Yes, ma'am. I'm ready." But was he really? He closed his eyes, whispering a silent prayer. "Lord, I'm just a street singer. Let me sing like I always do for you, for Ma, and for the ones who never got their chance." The stage lights dimmed. The host's voice echoed through the auditorium. Next up, we have a special contestant, a street performer from the Philippines whose voice has captured hearts around the world. Please welcome Marco Dela Cruz. The audience erupted into applause. Marco stepped onto the stage, each step echoing in his ears. The lights were blinding, he could barely see the judges' faces: Simon Cowell, Sofia Vergara, Howie Mandel, and Heidi Klum all seated before him. He took a deep breath. Simon leaned forward. "Hello there. What's your name?" "Good evening, sir. My name is Marco." "Marco Dela Cruz," he said nervously, his accent thick but his voice steady. "And where are you from?" Heidi asked with a warm smile. "I'm from Manila, Philippines," Marco replied proudly, earning a cheer from the crowd. Simon's tone softened. "So, Marco, what do you do back home?" "I sing on the streets, sir. Outside churches, in alleys. Anywhere people will listen," he said humbly. A murmur rippled through the audience. Simon tilted his head, intrigued. "And why did you decide to come here?" Marco looked down for a moment, then met Simon's gaze. "Because someone once told me that if you sing from your heart, the world will listen. I just want to share that. Not to be famous, but to give people hope. Like Elvis did." That name Elvis caught everyone's attention. Simon smiled slightly. "All right, Marco. The stage is yours." The lights dimmed again. A hush fell over the arena. Marco sat on a stool at center stage, gripping his guitar. He whispered a quiet, "Thank you," under his breath, and then began to strum. The opening chords of "If I Can Dream" filled the air. The same song he sang under the rain back home. But this time, his voice was stronger, richer, deeper, carrying every hardship, every prayer, every sleepless night spent believing there must be lights burning brighter somewhere. The first line alone sent chills through the room. The crowd fell utterly silent. His tone was pure emotion, not an imitation of Elvis, but something real, something lived. "Out there in the dark, there's a beckoning candle." The camera zoomed in on Marco's face, eyes glistening, veins visible in his neck, every word trembling with feeling. Simon's usual stoic expression softened. Sophia covered her heart. In the audience, people leaned forward, unable to look away. As long as a man has the strength to dream, he can redeem his soul and fly. When he hit that note, that impossible, aching note, the audience gasped. It wasn't just powerful. It was transcendent. And then, silence. For a moment, time stopped. Then the crowd rose, a roaring standing ovation that shook the room. Tears streamed down faces. People shouted his name. Marco sat frozen, overwhelmed, clutching his guitar as if to steady himself. He looked toward the judges' table, where Simon Cowell, the man famous for never standing, slowly rose to his feet, clapping. Simon's eyes glistened. He leaned toward the microphone. "Marco, I've heard thousands of singers in my life. But what you just did, that was more than a performance. That was a story. You didn't just sing Elvis, you reminded us why music exists in the first place." The audience cheered louder. Sophia added, "That voice, it's from another time, another soul. You made us feel every word." Howie wiped his eyes. "That wasn't an audition, Marco. That was a blessing." Marco tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I sing for my mom, for my father, for my country. I just wanted to make them proud." The camera panned to the side of the stage, his mother, standing with tears streaming down her cheeks, her hands clasped in prayer. Simon smiled gently. "You already have." The crowd erupted again, a sea of people clapping, cheering, chanting his name. "Marco! Marco! Marco!" He bowed deeply, tears spilling down his face. For a moment, he wasn't the poor boy from the streets. He wasn't just a viral singer. He was a man who had turned his pain into power, his struggle into song. Backstage, after the performance, Marco sat quietly in a corner, still trembling. His mother walked up to him, her smile radiant through tears. "You did it, Anak," she whispered. "Your father would be so proud." He hugged her tightly, his voice breaking. "Ma. We did it." She smiled. "No, you did. You turned our little alley into a world stage." Later that night, as the episode aired and clips spread across the internet, millions around the globe watched that performance. Reactions poured in, people crying, smiling, rediscovering hope in a world that often felt cold. News anchors called him the heart of Manila. Elvis tribute forums said he didn't imitate the king, he honored him. But to Marco, none of that mattered as much as one quiet moment sitting beside his mother in the hotel room, holding her hand as they watched the replay. He looked at her and said softly, "You see, Ma. You were right. Someone heard me." She smiled, her eyes shimmering. "No, Anak. They didn't just hear you. They felt you." And for the first time in his life, Marco truly believed it, that a voice born in the narrow streets of Manila could reach across oceans, cross every border, and remind the world of something timeless, that greatness doesn't come from where you start, but from how deeply you dare to sing your truth. The world had changed for Marco Dela Cruz, or so everyone thought. Overnight, he had become a sensation. His performance of "If I Can Dream" was played on televisions and phones across the globe. Talk shows called him the Filipino Elvis. Record companies offered him contracts, and talent agents lined up, promising mansions, tours, and money beyond imagination. But when Marco stood in front of the flashing cameras, microphones thrust toward him, and reporters asking, "What's next for you, Marco?" he simply smiled and said softly, "I'm going home." Returning home. 2 weeks later, Marco stepped off a crowded bus in Profession, the heart of Manila. The same streets that had once been his stage now seemed to welcome him like an old friend. Jeepneys rumbled past, children chased after each other barefoot, and the smell of roasted corn filled the air. Marco's heart swelled with emotion. He had stood on one of the world's biggest stages. Yet nothing compared to this, the sound of life, raw and real. When he reached the narrow alley where he had once sung for coins, he stopped. The paint on the walls had faded, and the posters that once hung there were torn, but the echoes of his past were still alive. He could almost see his younger self barefoot, holding a cheap microphone, his mother smiling from the corner. Tears welled up in his eyes. He whispered, "Ma. I did it." Inside their small home, his mother, Lorna, was sitting near the window, mending a rosary string. When she saw him, her face lit up brighter than any spotlight could ever shine. "Marco." she cried, her voice trembling with joy. He dropped his bag and rushed to her side, hugging her tightly. "Ma, I missed you." She cupped his face in her frail hands and said, "I told you, Anak, the world needed to hear you." They talked for hours. Marco told her about the audience that stood for him, about Simon Cowell's tears, about how people around the world were inspired by his journey. His mother just listened, her eyes glistening with pride. But when he told her about the offers, the world tours, the contracts, she grew quiet. "And what will you do now?" she asked softly. Marco looked at her hands, calloused from years of labor. "I think I know, Ma," he said. "I'm not chasing stages anymore. I'm going to build something for kids like me. Building a dream for others." The next morning, Marco went to the local community center, a crumbling building that barely stood, its roof patched with metal sheets. He spoke to the barangay captain, an old man named Mang Tonyo, who had watched Marco grow up. "You're back, Hijo," Tonyo exclaimed, slapping him on the back. "The pride of our street. So, what brings you here?" "I want to open a music school," Marco said. "Not fancy. Just a small place where kids can sing, learn, and dream like I did." Tonyo raised his eyebrows. "A school? Here?" "Yes," Marco replied. "For the children who sing on sidewalks, who can't afford lessons. For the ones who think dreams are too expensive. The old man's expression softened. You have a good heart, Marco. I'll help you get the permits. And so, with his savings and some donations from fans who had followed his story, Marco began to transform the abandoned space beside the community center. The walls were painted with bright murals, guitars, musical notes, and the smiling faces of children. Old instruments were repaired, and a small recording corner was set up with second-hand microphones. He named it the Dream Harmony School. The first students on opening day, only 6 children came. They were shy kids from the streets, holding broken guitars, homemade tambourines, and dreams too fragile to speak aloud. Marco sat with them, cross-legged on the floor, and told his story, not the version the media told, but the truth. I didn't start on a big stage, he said, his voice gentle. I started right where you are, barefoot, scared, and hungry. But I had one thing that kept me going, music. It was my way of saying to the world, I'm still here. The children listened, wide-eyed. Then he smiled and added, so let's make sure the world hears you too. He taught them to sing with feeling, not just tune. Don't copy my voice, he said. Find your own. Every day, the sounds of laughter and music filled the alley that once echoed with struggle. Local vendors would stop to listen, smiling as the kids' voices grew stronger, more confident. The full circle months passed, and Marco's school became a beacon of hope. More children joined, and soon local musicians volunteered to teach. Donations poured in from around the world, fans inspired by Marco's humility. News crews came again, expecting to find a celebrity mansion, but instead, they found him sitting on a wooden stool, helping a young boy strum his first chords. A reporter asked, "You could be living in Hollywood. Why here?" Marco smiled. Because this is where my music was born. Fame fades. But if one child sings because I stayed, then that's worth more than any applause. A concert of gratitude. To celebrate the school's first anniversary, Marco organized a small concert in the same alley where it all began. Strings of lights hung between rooftops, the smell of home-cooked food filled the air, and the crowd gathered neighbors, children, street vendors, and even tourists who had once seen his viral video. The children performed first singing, playing instruments, and smiling proudly. Then, at the end, they called out, "Kuya Marco. Sing with us." Marco took the microphone, his heart swelling with emotion. "This song is for every soul who believed they weren't enough," he said. He began to sing Elvis's "Can't Help Falling in Love." His voice, though more refined now, still carried the same soul that had once echoed through the streets. As he sang, he saw faces glowing in the soft light, his mother, the children, the neighbors, and he realized this was his true standing ovation. When the song ended, there was silence. And then, applause. Not the thunderous roar of a global stage, but the warm, heartfelt clapping of people who knew him, who believed in him. It was pure, it was honest, and it was home. A legacy of kindness. Years later, people would still speak of Marco Dela Cruz, the man who sang Elvis like no other, not because he sounded like the king of rock and roll, but because he sang with the heart of a servant and the soul of a dreamer. His music school grew, giving countless children a chance to rise above poverty through art. On the front wall of the school, he painted words his mother once told him, "Dreams are gifts from God, but they only shine when you share them." Closing message. And so, Marco's journey from humble streets to standing ovation came full circle. His story wasn't about fame, or money, or recognition. It was about the power of kindness, the beauty of humility, and the miracle that happens when one person's dream becomes another's hope. He had once sung to survive. Now, he sang so others could live. And in doing so, he proved that the greatest music of all is made not on stages, but in hearts.